Hello, everyone.
Hi, everyone.
Hi, Kelly from Canada and James from North Carolina. Welcome. So I will get us started. Thanks very much for joining us for the sixth beginners course now of LiveCode Global 2021. Today's session, as always, will be delivered to you by Eleanor, and she's going to be giving us an introduction to data grids and then demonstrating how to apply the implementation of data grids to the game that we've been developing over the course so far. As always, just pop any questions you've got in the chat, and as we go through, I'll draw Eleanor's attention and we can get those answered. And then if at the end you want to ask some questions, we'll have a Q&A as well. So without any more from me, I'll hand you over to Eleanor for the first half of the session.
All right, thank you, Chris. So like Chris said, what we're going to do is we're going to do a bit of an introduction to data grids, sort of out with or outside the Anagram game app, because turns out there is actually so far not that many places to put data grids into our Anagram game. We are going to do it, but what we're going to do is we're going to start by looking at some examples of data grids to begin with anyway. So I'll give people a couple of minutes just to arrive, and then we will get started.
Seeing as we're waiting for some people to arrive, I'll just mention as well, as usual, we've got the coffee break on Zoom during the break, so I'll put the link in throughout the first session. Feel free to join us for that. 20 minutes from 10 to until 10 past the hour.
Yeah. So you can all go and have a break and chat to whoever's in the room with Chris.
Yeah, we've got
today.
Will and Daniel today, two of our new developers.
Great. So yes, we've got quite a few people joined us now, as always, from all over. I think Mark in London is probably the closest person to Chris and I at the moment. But yeah, okay, so that's been a couple of minutes. I think we've got quite a few people joined, so let's get started. We'll just start sharing my screen and move Chris and myself out of the way. So like I said, we're going to start with, let me bring up my slides to begin with. Actually, we'll just do a few slides at the start, and then we'll get going with in LiveCode. So we'll be looking at what is a data grid. I'm sure that anybody who has been using LiveCode for a while, which is quite a lot of you, will have encountered data grids, used data grids, but it's always good to go over them again. And I think we've got some people who are new to LiveCode in the sessions. So we'll be starting with the basics, and then we'll be moving on to putting some data grids into our app. And if you've got any questions about data grids in general, do feel free to ask them as well. And actually, for anybody who's signed up for the advanced course tomorrow, it is also on data grids, so there'll be more stuff covered there. So we'll be looking at what is a data grid, the two different types of data grids, so data grid tables and data grid forms, and then we'll be adding them to our app. So the data grid has been part of LiveCode for a good few years now. I probably should have looked this up before the session, but I can't remember how long it's been, but it's been in there. It's been in there for a while. And it is a control that enables you to integrate tables and forms into your LiveCode project. So we've always been able to set up a multi-line or a list field as a table, but it's not so easy to, if you think of it like a spreadsheet, it's not particularly easy to access the individual cells, for want of a better description, in a table field. Obviously, you can use item delimiters, things like that. And there's also, but there's not a way to get, cell 3.3 or whichever one you're interested in. There's also a limit to how much control you have over the display of a table field, and it doesn't have features like headings or sorting or anything like that. Now, the data grid has all these things. Of course, a table field might cover everything that you need, in which case using a data grid might be more work than is needed in a particular case. But they are there if you want something just a little bit or a lot more advanced than a table field. So data grids are actually, they're a group, and they combine groups and behaviors to give you like quite a simple method of displaying your data. So each row, so the data grid itself is a group, each row is a group, and each row has a row behavior. So it's utilizing groups and behavior scripts to make quite a powerful control. So there are two types of data grid. There's tables, which kind of looks a bit like a spreadsheet, and you can sort the columns and you can edit them, things like that. And by default, each column of each row, so each cell, for if you want to think of them as cells, is a field. So the data grid table is very simple. You just add your columns, put your data in, and it will display it nicely for you and provide things like sorting and resizing of columns, things like that. But you are slightly limited in what controls you can have in there. So if you want a more customized data grid, then you can use a data grid form. So it's lets you display your records, one per row, but the actual template that's used for each row can have any controls that you want in it. So it can have fields and buttons and images and anything else you want in there. So you can customize it to create any sort of display for your rows that you want. And the other nice thing about data grids is that they're very fast, because what they do is they have a certain number of row templates. So if you've got 1,000 rows of data, it doesn't need to create you 1,000 copies of the row template. It will create as many as you need to provide scrolling in the data grid. And as you scroll, it will reuse those templates and just fill in the sort of replace the data in the actual controls. So if you've got 1,000 rows and each of those has 10 controls in it, that would be a lot of controls on your stack. The data grid will do sort of a type of paging method, where instead of having to create all those controls as you scroll, it will reuse the existing controls. So it's nice and fast and very efficient. Okay, so what we're going to do in the first part of the session is we're going to create a few different data grids with different types of data. We're going to do a contact list. So for that, I found a sort of sample CSV data just with dummy name and address data in it. And we'll also be doing a very simple one, which is just countries and their capitals. So we'll be doing these sample data grid tables and data grid forms, and then we will move to the anagram game, and then some of the places that we've got list fields, we'll replace those with data grids just to see what we can do in there. So I'll just have a quick look. I saw some chats popped up, but it's just people saying good morning, no questions yet. So let me see. Yes, great. So I will stop showing the slides and we can move over to using LiveCode. Let me share my screen again. Okay, great. And I will start up LiveCode here. 963. Did that start? Doesn't look like it did. Oh, yeah, there it goes. All right, great. So we're going to start with a very simple data grid table. So here we have LiveCode, and what we're going to do is we're just going to start a new default size stack. I'll stretch it out a little bit. That might pop up a few times. It keeps popping up and it doesn't actually let me install the, let me see if I can turn off. I thought I had turned off notifications, but if you give me 2 seconds and I will double check. Yep, my notifications are paused. All right, so sorry, coming back to this. So we're going to create a very simple data grid table. And so to create our data grid, it is in the tools palette here. If I hover over it, next to the table field, scrolling field, it is our data grid. And we'll drag it out and we'll just have it taking up a bit more space. So you can see here is our data grid. Here are our rows, alternating colors to make it to sort of separate out the data. And if I open up the property inspector for the data grid, oh, it's way down here. I thought it hadn't opened, but it's opened down here. So here we are. There we go. So here is our data grid. It's named Datagrid 1. Just change the name of that to call it capitals. It's always a good practice to give your controls a name early on so that when you come to write code later, they've already got a name. And we'll have a look at some of the objects that we have in the property inspector here. So we have here, we've just got our sort of basic general controls, the name, the label, the tooltip, disabled, border width, etc. These are common between all LiveCode controls. So these are quite basic properties. And for our second pane, this is where we have some of our data grid specific properties. So we've got the style, which is either table or form. We can choose whether to show the scroll bars. They can be true or false, or auto, which means it's shown automatically when there's enough data to scroll, but until then you have nothing. So we've got the horizontal scroll bar, the vertical scroll bar, and then we've got some options here for allowing editing, which means that if you allow editing, the user can double click and type into the data grid. Alternate row colors, you can turn that on and off. Auto highlight, similarly for like you'd have in a field. If that's on, when I click on it, the row will be highlighted. If it's off, it won't be. Multiple lines goes with auto highlight. Column resizing, persistent data, and row height. So these are the main ones. Then we've got our contents tab, which will show you a tab delimited version of the data in the data grid. Then we've got our columns. So here we can add columns, give them a name, a label, a width, a minimum width, maximum width. So we can set up all our columns in our data grid. There's a few more there. Sort orders, etc. And then the rest of these controls are just the sort of standard LiveCode properties for controls. We've got colors, effects, text formatting. So the main ones here that are specific to the data grid are the data grid properties here and the columns. The rest of the properties are common LiveCode properties. All right, so what we're going to do, we've created our stack, we've dragged on a data grid, we have given it a name, and the simplest way to populate our data grid is just to paste some data, some tab separated data into the contents pane. So I should have something ready. Where's my, so I've got a capitals.tsv file that I can open up. Let's open it up in numbers. Let's open it up in a text editor instead. And I've saved it as tab separated data just because that's what the data grid expects, because that then obviously allows you to have columns, to have commas, not columns, commas in your data. So if I just copy this, and if I go back to my property inspector, make sure I'm on the text property, paste it in, and it will automatically create me a data grid with 2 columns because I've got 2 columns of data. They're tab separated. If there were more, it would create me more columns. And so it's created me my 2 columns with the tab separated data in here. And that is our first simplest data grid. Just check there's no questions yet, and there is not. So that's the most basic version of a data grid. You just create the data grid, you paste in your tab separated values, and there you go, you've got your data grid set up. Now what we can do now that we've got our columns in our property inspector is we can go to our columns tab and we can set the properties of the columns. So column 1, we want the name of that to be country. And column 2, we want the name of that to be capital. Now we've got headers that match our column names. And also, if we wanted to, we could set the widths, etc. You can also have a separate column name and column label. So if you want your column name to, for example, have no spaces in it, but you want your column label to have spaces, then you can separate them out, just like you can separate out the name and the label of a button. So those are two separate properties. And then, yes, of course, you can do things like you can have the column minimum width so it can't get below a certain size. And if I go into run mode, you'll see that I can resize my columns just by clicking in the sort of the resize bar in the header. If I turn off column drag to resize, then maybe I need to do it per column. If I turn it off for country and turn it off for capital, then I believe that should prevent resizing. So if you don't want your user to be able to resize your columns, you've got control over that. And the other thing that you can do is you can automatically, the Datagrid has sorting. So I can sort capitals in reverse alphabetical order or ascending alphabetical order, the same for country. If we had a column with numbers in it, you'd be able to sort numerically. So the nice thing about the Datagrid is that it comes with all these features already built in. So if you want, for example, something like this, or as we're going to do later, a contact list or something, if you want to be able to sort by surname, then you'd be able to do it just by clicking in the header bar here. Whereas if you were using, for example, a list field, a highlightable list field to do that, you would have to write some code to do the sorting, which is not a difficult thing to do, but it comes built in with the Datagrid. Okay, so that is a simple Datagrid column. We've had to look at the different properties. You can resize, you can sort. So there are different ways that you can populate your Datagrid with data. So the way that we did it was we just pasted into our text pane. There it is. But if you want to do it in script, there's two ways you can do it. You can set the DG text of the Datagrid, so that's a property, the DG text, or you can set the DG data of the Datagrid. So what we'll do is we'll make a start on our contacts table, and we'll look at the different ways that you can populate the data there. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to quit LiveCode and restart, and we'll start with our contacts, which I will also open up. It's the contacts is a CSV, so we'll need to deal with that when we load it in. You can download it from the web page that I mentioned, but it's just 500 dummy bits of information as a CSV. You can see there's the sort of column or the field names at the top, first name, last name, company, etc. And there's 500 of them. So that's the file that we will be using. So I'll just restart LiveCode, and we'll start a new Datagrid. And we'll do it as a table, and then we'll do it as a form. So we'll do our Datagrid table first. So again, we'll start a new stack. We'll drag that out because there's quite a lot of data. We will drag on our Datagrid, and we'll open up the property inspector. We'll set the name of it to contacts. What we're going to do this time is we're going to set up our columns in advance. So what we're going to do is we're going to go to our columns, and we're going to add columns for first name, last name, address, city, county, postal code, phone and email. So column 1 we will call first name. And this is where we might want to use the column label here. So the column name is first name, but we can maybe have first name as a label. It's a bit nicer to look at. The same for last name. So we create our column, set the name, and set the label. There's a little glitch there where it doesn't seem to have, there we go. Doesn't seem to register the column name there. And then we'll do the same for address, city. So address, city, county, postal code, phone, and email. So I'll just go through and add all these. We've got address, and we've got city, county, postal, and email. And I don't think I need column 8, that was an extra one. So if you've got an extra column, you can highlight it and then you can click on the bin icon and that will delete your column 8. So I've got first name, last name, address, city, county, postal. Oh, I missed phone, that's what I did. So what I'll do is I'll add another one. So my column 8 is phone. And if you want to reorder your columns, so if I want email to go before phone, then I can highlight email in the property inspector. I can click the up button and it'll swap those over. So actually I want it to go city, county, then postal. So postal, I want to move up to after county, and it's phone that I want to go, I want email at the end. There we go. So first name, last name, address, city, county, postal, phone, email. So those are all our columns. Now, as before, we could now go and we could paste our data in, but if you're wanting to load it in from a file in your app, whether it's a CSV file or a database or pulled down from a web service, then you won't be wanting to, or you won't be able to use the property inspector. So we need to do it in code. So what we'll do is we will add a button and we'll add some code to it. So I'll set the name of the button to set data. And then we'll open up for the button and we will add a mouse up handler. Let me just check did I turn up my text size? I didn't. Let's turn that up a bit, make it a bit easier to see. There we go. Okay, so we've added all our columns, and what we're going to do is we want to load it. We're going to load it in from our file. So we want to use a file URL. So we'll put URL. And then it starts with file colon. And then we know that the file is going to be in the same folder as our stack. So it will be in special folder path resources. You could, of course, use an answer file or something like that to have somebody choose the file, or you could get it from documents or wherever it might be, but ours is in resources with an S. So it's special folder path resources and / and it is called UK500.csv. Just make sure that I get that right. So it's UK500.csv. So we'll put that into a variable t data, and then what we're going to do is we're going to have to look through it because it's comma separated data. So what we're going to do is we don't need to look through actually. All I'm going to do here for the DG text is I'm going to replace comma with tab in T data. And I'm going to set the DG text of group contacts to T data. So the DG text property of the data grid is just the data that's shown in the data grid in a tab separated format. So all we've done here is turned our comma separated values into tab separated values. And we're going to set the DG text of the group to T data. What I'm going to do is I'm going to give my stack a name. So I'll just call this contact list, and I'm going to save it. And I'm going to save it into my beginner's course session 6 folder because that's where my UK 500 CSV is. All right, and now hopefully if I switch to run mode and click set data, then it populates our data grid with the data from that file. Now you'll notice that we've got some speech mark, quotation marks here because they're in the file. So there's different ways that we could deal with that, but we'll look at that in the thing that we're going to do next. And the one thing that I wanted to show you here is obviously oh, so also here, because our CSV file has sort of headers in it, what I'm going to do is I'm going to change my script here a little bit. So what I can do here, there's, as always with LiveCode, there's lots of ways that you can do this. We can say delete line 1 of tdata. Let's try that. And there's also, I think, if we have a look in the dictionary at the DG text property, you can also say that the first row contains column names. So if I set the DG text with true here, or false, how does that work again? Let's see. Yeah, so here, if P first line contains headers is true, then the columns must already exist. So in the dictionary it says it's column names. So I think that means that you can say that if the data that you're setting it to contains column names, then it will ignore them. But we have to make sure that the column names that are in the CSV file match the column names that we created, and they didn't quite. If I put this back to how it was before, so we don't delete line 1, then you can see that I called this first name. The column name has no space, but this has an underscore. So it wouldn't quite work in this case because they should actually match. But if they matched, we would just be able to say, set the DG text with true here, because then you're telling it that the data that you're setting does contain column names. In our case, it doesn't quite match. So what we're going to do is we're just going to delete line 1. There is our data. And the other thing that I want to show you here, no, that won't work. I'll show you it next, is it's sometimes important, like how I mentioned, if you're using the DG text square brackets true, that the column names match what's included in the data. Similarly, there's cases where if the column names don't match your data, then they won't be populated.
Also got a question there from Jürgen, asking if he can download or upload an Excel spreadsheet.
Well, in the next section, we'll be looking at how to convert it into a database. Into an array. Convert our data to an array. So the Datagrid expects tab separated values. So I think from Excel you can export as tab separated values, but I'm not sure that just an Excel sheet would work, because I think the Excel sort of file format has a lot of extra data in it. It's not just a pure CSV or a pure TSV. So I think there are a bunch of LiveCode of lessons, which I've got a slide about at the end, but let's just take a quick look at the lessons. The Datagrid lessons are really good, actually. I would recommend looking at them if you're doing Datagrid stuff, because there is at least one lesson on something similar to that, if I can remember exactly where it is. Let's just... I think there's a lesson about converting a database cursor for display in a Datagrid. Let's see. If it doesn't come up within a few seconds, I must be thinking of something else. Datagrid forms, Datagrid tables. I'll search here and see if it comes up, and we'll see. But certainly I don't think you can do it directly. Here we go. Converting a database cursor to a Datagrid array. I think that's what I was thinking of. So that's more to do with databases, but it explains how to convert it to the style of data that's needed. And you could do a similar thing with Excel, but I think it would still take a bit of code.
Got a couple of other comments there. I think James has said, is a column header missing?
I didn't put all the columns in just because there's quite a lot in the data file. There's company name, there's website, there's a few other ones, but just because it's just an example, I just included a few of them. So So I didn't include company name. And then Peter's suggested try the following for CSV to tab, replace quote and comma and quote with tab. That's a good idea. Let's try that. Because then that would also, if there are any commas within any of the bits of data, that would not include those. So we would replace quote and comma, quote, comma, and quote with tabs. So that should put tabs in between most of them. I'll put a breakpoint here so we can see what the data looks like. I think it might miss a couple at the start and the end, which we could easily do manually. So what does our P data look like now? So yeah, that's done all of them except the first and last on each row. And of course, if we now do, so what we can maybe do is we can either look through and do something for each line, or we could just place quote with empty data, which for some data sources might not be safe because you might have things where you want quotes, but in this particular case that worked nicely. So what we've done is we've replaced quote, comma, quote, which is what would appear sort of in between any two fields, which is why it didn't work at the start and work at the end, because it was just the quotes. And that's given us nice tab separated values without all the quotes. So that is a nice tweak there. Okay, so that is our simple version of a table where we're setting the DG text. The other way that we can set the data on the data grid is to set the DG data, and that is an array. So some cases, for example, if you are pulling from a database, it might be easier to convert to an array. Later on, when you're actually when we look at getting the data associated with a row, it might be easier to pull out the bit that you want from an array rather than needing to know that it's item 7 of the row. So what we'll do is we'll look at DG text, DG data now. Sorry, it was DG text that we just did. So what I'll do to clear it out is I'll set the DG text. Contacts empty, and that should clear our data grid. There we go. And what we'll do this time is, again, we'll use our data from our CSV. We'll delete line 1, or we can actually start on line 2. So what we'll do is we are going to repeat with x equals 2 to number of lines in T data, and then at the end we'll set the DG data of group contacts to T array, and we will build our array of information. And rather than typing it all out, I'm going to paste it in. Hope that works. I've pasted the repeat as well, so let's get rid of this and this. What we're doing is repeating item 1, which is if we remember, is the first name of line X of T data into T array X minus 1, because we're starting on 2. First name, last name, address, city, county. So I'm just building an array with a numerical index, which will be the row number that something goes on to. And then because we have an array, instead of setting the DG text, we will set the DG data. So make sure I'm in run mode. I will click the button and let's have a look at our data array. So there's 1. We've got first name, last name, etc. And that's with all our rows. So if I run that now, you will see that the data grid is now populated. And DG data and DG text, when I say they're equivalent, they sort of affect each other. So if you've set the DG data, you can also always get the DG text or vice versa. So here, if we have a look at our contents, so you can see that we set the DG text, but the DG data, sorry, we set the DG data, but the DG text, which is the tab separated value, also exists. So they are both there. So you can access both of them. If you set one, then the other exists too, if that makes sense. So now let's have a look at what we did here. And to get rid of our quotes in this case, I think a nice way to do it, we could do what we did before. We could do the replace all the quotes, but another way we could do it is we could put R2 to -2 of item 1, 2, 4, etc. So that will give us character 2 to character -2. So that's the second character to the second last character of each item. So that will chop off character 1, which is a quote, and character -1, or the last character, which is also a quote. And so what we're doing is we're doing that before we update our array. So apply that, switch back, set the data, and that will remove all our quotes. Now this, when we're using DG data, this is where we have to be a bit more careful with our column names. So if one of these, if I've made a typo here, so if I'd put 2 E's there, and then I tried setting my DG data, and because it doesn't match, because it's actually looking at the name of the element and comparing it to the name of the column here, if they don't match, it won't be populated. So if it doesn't match there, or alternatively, if the actual column name in the property inspector, so if the actual column name property, columns is here, there's a typo there, and the column label doesn't matter. It's just the column name that does. There's definitely something a bit funny going on there with that being cleared out when I didn't want it to. Okay, so first name and then the column label. Now if I try and set it again, it won't be set because it doesn't match, because now that column name is called first name ABCD, whatever it was. But if I put it back, hopefully it works if I do it this way. Yeah, looks like it's all right now. Then if I set it again, it's back. So when you're using the DG data, you have to be careful that the column names and the names of your elements in your array match up. But it does mean that if you're pulling it out of a database or something else, rather than having to build up a set of tab separated values, you can just build yourself an array and set it on the Datagrid. Okay, so those were both tables. Now we're going to have a quick look at setting up a Datagrid form. So again, we're going to use our contact details, but we're going to use a form instead of a table. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to delete this one, and that's fine. I do want to delete it. And what we'll do, drag out a new, oh, it's not happy about me having another Datagrid. So what I'll do is I'll just I'll save that and I'll restart LiveCode. Normally it's not a problem. Normally you can have multiple Datagrids. I just saw that James, while this is starting up, I see that James has asked, can we set the column names using code? And yes, you absolutely can. So in the same way that all LiveCode properties that appear in the property inspector can be set in code, then it's also true for the Datagrid properties. If I open up the dictionary, there's a couple of ways you can do it. So there's the DG column names, which I think is a list. Oh no, it's DG column name. So yeah, so you can set the DG column name, column 1 of group Datagrid to first name, etc. So there's the DG column names. All the Datagrid properties, I think I say all, pretty sure it's all of them, but all the Datagrid properties start with DG for Datagrid, just to differentiate them from other very similar property names that don't apply to the Datagrid. The Datagrid is a control that was written before we had widgets or anything like that, which is why it is built up entirely of other LiveCode controls. So they all start with DG just to differentiate them from other LiveCode properties. So yeah, there's the DG column name. I think there's also a list of DG column names that you can set, but yes, basically all the Datagrid properties can be set in code. And again, there's a lesson that has a list of all the property names. And actually, when it comes, we'll be able to look at it in the, I think we'll be able to look at it in the property inspector as well. Okay, so here's our contact list. Now we'll add our data grid. It's happened that time. And we'll set the name of it to contacts. This time we're going to make a form. So what we do is we go to the data grid, I think it's called Datagrid. Yeah, the Datagrid tab, and instead of a table, we're going to create a form. Now, you'll see here that there isn't a column. Now that we change it to a form, there isn't a columns section here. So Datagrid forms don't have columns in the same way that Datagrid tables do. Instead, what you do is you set up your row template to exactly the way that you want it to look, and then you update the script to populate it with all the data. So we've changed it to a form. So what we want to do is, the first thing we're going to do is we're going to create our row template. So to do that, click on the row template button here. So each data grid has its own row template. So you can have multiple data grids and each one can have their own row template. And these are stored on substacks of your main stack, which are automatically created for you when you create data grids. And each row template is a group. So this is our row template group. So when we're editing it, we need to be really careful that any controls that we add to it go into the group. So if I just drag a button on here, that button's just on the stack. It's not part of our row template group, so it wouldn't appear. So that's one thing you need to be pretty careful of. So what we want to do is we want to add controls to our row template. So we select the group, make sure we've got select grouped on so that we're selecting the group itself. And then we choose edit group. And in here, you'll see that there is a field called label and a graphic called background. Now you want to leave the background graphic there always, or until you might one day become very, very comfortable with data grids. You might decide that you don't want a background graphic, but most of the time you'll want a background graphic because that sort of defines the area, the sort of row area. It's what changes color when you highlight a line, etc. So you want to leave the background graphic there. But what we will do is we will add all the controls that we want for our contact list. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to leave that label field there, but I'm going to change the name of it to name. So I'm going to have name. And then I'm going to have underneath that, I will have what comes after name in our list. Address. Then there's city and county. So maybe they can go sort of next to each other. So actually what I'm going to do, just so that we can see what we're doing, is I'm going to put borders on these just for now. So this will be our city. And then we've got our county. What we'll do is we'll put county and postal next to each other, make them smaller. So you can be county. And then we'll have postal code. And then what I'll do is I think over here, I will have my phone and my email. We can put these up here. So like I say, this can be laid out any way you want, any controls you want. So we'll have phone, and then we'll have email. Now, obviously, this isn't particularly nice looking or tidy at the moment, but you can adjust all these things. And then I think what we'll do, just to show that we can have different types of control, let's add a couple of SVG widgets next to our phone and our email. So let's make this one phone. And then we'll make this one our email icon. It might be called envelope. There we go. What we need to do is we want to make sure that we have named all our controls. So that will be name. This is address. Then I was going to have city, county, postal, then phone and email. Oh, I did it. Did it without thinking. So we still need to name our SVG icon. So this can be phone icon, and this can be email icon. Now you can have any types of controls. Here we've just got fields and SVGs, but you could have buttons. You could have an image for, a profile picture, anything like that. You can put any types of controls that you want into your row template. And at the moment, we're just going to leave it looking like this. Then later on, we'll be looking at code to resize it, etc. But for now, we'll just copy this and lay it out. So that's our row template, and we've made sure that everything is in our group. So we can see that that's all in the group. None of these are, accidentally being created outside. Now, the next thing we need to do is we need to add the code to tell it how to lay itself out. So select your Datagrid, go to the Datagrid tab, and this time we're going to edit the script. So this is the row template behavior. And the first thing you'll always want to do is you'll want to fill in the data. So fill in data for each row gets passed a data array of that row's data. So it'll only get an array one row at a time, and it'll be called once for each row that is created. So this is not the data array for the whole, this is not the DG data that you set, it's just one row's data. So what we need to do is we want to set the text of field name of me to pdata array, and it won't have a number because it's just for one row. So we're going to put first name and then space and then last name in here. So this is where you're starting to be able to customize things a bit. So we've customized our layout. We can also customize how things are actually displayed. It doesn't need to be one field per sort of element in our array. In this case, we can just have a name field that has first name and last name in it. Equally, you might want a checkbox for something that's true or false or on or off. You can use a checkbox for that, or a slider. So you can use any controls that you want, and you've got much more flexibility in a form. So we've got name, then where's my layout control? There we go. So we've got name, address, and we've got city, county, postal, phone, and email. So city, county, postal, phone, and email. And then the other two places that will be updating code, but for now we're just going to take out the default stuff. So fill in data will fill in the data. It'll just put those values into the fields. We've then also got layout control, which tells your row how to lay itself out. Now you'll see here that the default text is still referring to the label field, which doesn't exist anymore. So I'm just going to comment that out for now. And similarly, reset data, currently the default also refers to that label field that doesn't exist anymore. So we will comment that out as well. So all we've filled in is the fill in data stuff, which will update our fields. And let's see if that has worked. So we'll go into run mode. We'll click set data. So it's still setting the DG data on the Datagrid control. It's just that it is now a form rather than a table. And the problem here is that we have fixed control height turned on and set to 21. But if I turn that off and then click the button again, I don't even need to click the button again, you'll see that the rows have expanded to show all the data in the row, and it's using our template that we set up. And you'll see as well, you can see that I can select a row. So this is how you can start to really customize the look of your Datagrid. And I think that takes us up pretty much to time for the coffee break. So I will stop sharing my screen and I will show my slide for the coffee break. Let me make sure I show this week's one, because last month's is still there. Beginner's course, Zoom coffee break. Here we go. I think that's the right one. So that's the tiny URL, but I think Chris might also have done a button for it.
Yes, indeed. That should be in the chat. I'm not sure if you can see it, Eleanor. I don't know how. I think we can't see it, but
no, I can't see it, but hopefully everybody else can.
yeah. But yeah, that's the URL anyway. Cool. Well, I will fire up the Zoom link for those of you attending the coffee break, and then we'll be back here in 20 minutes.
Yes, I will, and I will see you all then.
Grand.
All right. Bye, everyone.
Right, perfectly timed. Just back from the coffee break.
Excellent. Welcome back, everyone. Hope you had a good break.
Indeed.
All right, let's just get back into it, I guess. I don't know if we need to wait for people to arrive back. I'm guessing everybody's still here. Let me see.
I reckon so.
Yeah. All right, let's just get back to it then. I will share my screen again. And let's pick up from where we left off, which is that we had just populated our Datagrid form. So as you can see, we didn't do anything with like laying out the Datagrid or anything. We just left it as the as the form was. So what we can do is there is code that we can edit to sort of lay this out a bit more nicely. So to do that, what we'll do again is we will make sure we've got our Datagrid selected, open up the inspector, go to the Datagrid tab, and I will open up the edit script again. So again, we're going to be editing this is the row template script. So the one that we'd filled in was fill in data, which is where we populate all the fields with data. If we want to lay it out nicely based on the size of the data grid, then we want to work with layout control. So if we have a look at the actual, there's some comments in here that explain what is happening. So this message is sent when you should lay out your templates control. So that happens both when you populate the data grid with data and if your data grid is set up to resize when you resize the stack or anything like that. So it explains a bit about what these different control rects are. So for fixed height data grid forms, you can use items 1 through 4 of the P control rect. For variable height data grid forms, you can use items 1 through 3 of P control rect, and then expand the height. Oh, excuse me, I'm going to cough. Sorry about that. Okay, so yes, you get the control rect, which is for fixed line heights. Oh, excuse me, I'm sorry. All right, hopefully okay now. Not sure, might cough again. Okay, so there's the two rects. So ours will actually be, although we turned on the we turned off the fixed control height, actually ours aren't going to change size. What we need to do is we just need to make this tall enough that everything will fit. So
Till's got a question there. He's said, can I print a data grid?
Yes, it depends what you mean by print a data grid. If you just want to So the way that printing normally works, oh gosh, excuse me, I'm so sorry.
Hey, when that happens.
It's just come out of nowhere. Yeah,
it always hits you in these moments as well. It's never just sitting on your own.
I know, I mean, I sit on my own all day and hardly ever have coughing fits. Yeah, so the way that printing usually works in LiveCode is that you print the card. So you print or a section of the card. So if you wanted to print a data grid, I think what you would have to do is you would have to print the card, scroll the data grid, print the card, scroll the data grid, print the card, scroll the data grid until you got to the bottom of it. There isn't a sort of command just to print the data grid, but because it is just controls on a card, there's no reason that you can't print a card that has a data grid on it. I hope that makes sense. So yes, basically you can, but you're limited by the way that printing just works in LiveCode, which is that it prints a section of the card or the card itself. Okay, so I'd got to 72. That wasn't quite tall enough. Let's try 80. 80 is pretty good. I think we can leave it at 80. So we'll leave it as a fixed control height. And in this case, it will work okay because I think that all the items in our array, but in our sample file, I think, for example, the address, we don't have any addresses with 2 lines, but you would be able to allow for that. If you needed to, you would just turn off fixed control height and you would allow the data grid to expand to show all the data. But ours will just leave as fixed line height of 80. So all we need to do is we just need to set lay out the controls across the card. And I think probably what we'll do, just make it a bit simpler, is we'll leave these ones, the name, address, city, county, and postal code, and we'll just move the phone and the email across to the right-hand side so that it uses up the space. But you can lay it out exactly how you want to. You can make the layout code as complicated or as uncomplicated as you want it to be. So because we have a fixed height data grid, we'll be using p-control-rect as the boundaries for laying out our controls. So what we will do is we will put item 3 of p-control-rect into to-right. We're just going to lay these out based on the right-hand side of the data grid, just to see what we can do. And of course, item 3 of the control-rect is right because rect is left, top, right, bottom, comma separated. So item 3 is the sort of the right boundary of the row. And what we'll do is we'll set the right of widget. What's at the top? Is it the email? That's the phone. So we'll set the right of widget phone icon of me to, let's do t-right -10, just to give it a bit of spacing. And then we'll set the right of field phone of me to the left of the widget. We'll lay them out relative to each other, so the left of widget phone icon. So we position the icon relative to the right-hand side of the space that we have, and then we position the field relative to that icon. And because our row template height doesn't change, we don't need to change the top or the bottom or anything like that. We'll just move it across to the right. And we'll do the same for email icon and the right field email, left widget email icon. One thing to be careful of in here, which I haven't mentioned before, is that because this is a row template and there will be multiple copies of this row template for all the different rows, you always need to be careful to refer to, when you're referring to controls in the row template, you always need to put of me in there because each row will have a phone icon widget. And so if you don't put the of me in, then LiveCode will always find the first one, so the one on the first row, and it'll always set the right of that, and it won't set the ones of the following rows. So when you're working in the behavior script for a data grid row, you need to be really careful whenever you're referring to controls to always of me, because you're saying, basically you're saying of this row, not of any of the other rows. So always have of me in there. So actually, having said that, I've missed some of me's there and there. So I've got of me, of me, of me, me, of me, of me. And if ever you're doing something like this with a data grid and it's not laying itself out how you expect, the first thing to look for is that you haven't missed any of me's. It's usually the issue with layout things. So let's see if that has worked. There we go. So just click the button again to reset all the data. And now our phone and email icons are set up to be on the left-hand side. And the other thing that we can do here is in our stack script, we can set up the data grid so that it changes size when the stack is resized. So what we do is we say on resize stack. And I've got a little bit of code ready that I can copy. And we're just going to resize our data grid and move it, and we'll move the button as well. So we're doing it all relative to the size of the stack. So on resize stack, we're going to set the width of group contacts of card 1 to the width of me minus 40. So we're going to leave 20 pixels at either side. Set the height to the height of the stack minus 82 to give us space for the button. Then we set the top left of the group to 2020, so we move it back up into the sort of that top left corner. And then we set the bottom right of the button relative to the bottom right corner of the stack as it resizes. So everything's just done relative to the width and the height of the stack. And that should then automatically, as we resize, our data grid will resize and the rows should lay themselves out. So there we go. And now, as you can see, it doesn't look that nice. So let's make a few changes in here. I still had my row template open, but if you needed to reopen it, just make sure you're in the property inspector. On the data grid tab, click on row template. And remember, when you're editing, that they're in a group. So select the group, go into edit group. Let's turn off all these borders. I just put them there so that we could really see what we were doing. So we'll turn off show border. We could change the color of these just to make it look a bit nicer. Let's make them orange. And we can also do things like, for example, this is an email. So if we wanted to, we could make that into a link. And then later on, we could, cause it to open our mail program when we click on the link. So let's just like that, and let's reset our data. So as you see, we just need to make any changes like that to our template, reset the data, and there is all our data. And of course, we can also play around with the properties of the data grid. So we can change things like we could set the row color. So we could have the row color white, and then alternate row color could be like a light gray instead of that blue color. You can change the highlighted text color to white, and the highlight color to purple. So all these things are controllable just in the property inspector, just similarly to any other LiveCode control. And of course, all settable in code by setting the values of the properties. Okay, so the last thing we'll look at in our little sample is how we get information about a row that's been selected. So we've got a data grid, it's all nicely laid out, it's got all our data in it, but what happens when we actually want to do something with some of the data in here? So there's two main ways that you can do it. You can get the DG data, which is the array, or the DG text. You can get the DG text or the DG data of the array, and then use chunk expressions, etc., to find the bit you need. Or you can get the DG data of a line or of an index, which will give you the array data for a single row. So the first method we'll look at, so what I'm going to do is when we click on a row, I'm just going to pop up the person's name just as an example. So we select our data grid, open up the object script, and we're going to handle mouse up. It gets mouse up just like a button or other control does. And the first thing we want to do is we want to detect which row has been highlighted. So similarly, if you've got a list field where you can get the highlighted line of a field, you can get the DG highlighted line of a data grid. So I will put the DG highlighted line of me into T line. Now the first method I'm going to use, I'm going to get the DG data, which is the full data array. So I'll put the DG data of me into T array. That will be our numerically indexed array of all of the data that's shown in the data grid. And then I can answer T array, T line, just go with first name. First name. And that should, when we highlight a line by clicking on it, pop up the name of the selected line. So let's try this one, Evan or Ulysses. So that's the first way to do it. Now that works because our array is not super complicated. It's not huge. But if you do have a very large amount of data, then getting the full DG data might not be the best way to go about it. So instead, we'll still get the DG highlighted line of me. We still want to know which line has been highlighted. But instead, what we will do is we can put the DG data of line. And then after that, because this comes back as an array, we give it the line number, and we'll put that into T array. Now this will now be just the array of just the selected, of the data and just the selected line. So we can take this out here. So we're getting the DG highlighted line, put the DG data of line T line, oh sorry, it's of me, because it's of the data grid. So these properties are all actually, they're all actually custom properties of the data grid. So because this is in the data grid script, because we're in the script of group contacts, then I can use of me. If we were somewhere else, we would say put the DG data of line T line of group contacts. We always need to include that. So get the line, the data, just the data of that line, and then we can answer just first name. And that should work. Yeah, so we get Evan, and if we scroll, we can get Corinne or Ashanti. So if I put a breakpoint here, you'll see that when I get that array there, instead of it being the full DG data, it's just the data associated with that selected line. So we can always get all the data associated with a row in our data grid using this method. So there's DG data of line, which takes a line number, and there's DG data of index, which takes an index as well. So they're sort of equivalent of each other. It just depends if you're using lines or indexes or indices. Okay, so that is our sort of brief overview of data grid tables and data grid forms. And next we're going to have a look at where we can use them in our game. So if anybody's got any questions just now, just pop them in the chat, and we've got about half an hour to have a look at putting some into our game. So I'm just going to quit LiveCode. I'll save my changes. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to open up the stack that where we were at the end of session 5, which hopefully, let me see, sorry, hide this so I can get to my.
And we have got a question there from Jürgen.
Yeah, what's our question? Can I sort the table by location, e.g. all records that live in Edinburgh? So just trying to think how you do it, because obviously the table provides sorting. Searching is something a bit different. You could definitely, what you could do is you could add a filter field, which would get the DG data or the DG text, then filter it, then reset it on the data grid. I don't know if there's actually built in. Let's have a look at the lessons again, or maybe there's something in the dictionary. I don't know if there's like a DG filter, rather than just filtering the actual the actual data. I think it would be a case of getting the data, filtering that and resetting it on the data grid. That's how I would sort of automatically do it, but that doesn't mean that there's not a better way. Let's have a look at our data grid lessons again, see what we can find. There's definitely sorting, so you can sort. Is there a filter? I think it would be a case of filtering the content and then resetting it rather than anything else. I'll see if I can find something. I'll put something into the slides when we upload them. But I think it would be a case of having to sort of manually filter the content and then reset it, which shouldn't take long. Should be quite fast. All right, so this I think is where we were, but I'm not. Oh, I think I've turned that into there. This is the wrong stack. Sorry, this is one that I've already done some stuff to. So let me open up a different one. I'm sure I've still got it here. Hopefully this is it. Yeah, that looks better. That's a field, not a data grid. So this is where we'd got to last time. We'd added all our scoring and everything. We can go here. We can see our scores. I've got a lot of scores there. I've obviously been doing some testing. So yeah, so there's two places that I was thinking we could add a data grid. We can add a data grid here, and maybe we can add a data grid for our found words as well. So let's look at the scores first. So here we have our scores table, and if we look at the content here, you can see that's already tab separated values. So it's really easy to replace this field with a nice data grid table. I think will be easier. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to delete the scores field, and I'm going to drag on a data grid table. Let's expand it a bit, and we'll open up the property inspector and we'll set the name of it to scores. And we'll give it 2 columns. So 2 columns, add a column, add a column. And our first column will be date. And our second column will be score. And then let's have a look at our card script, so that because we'll need to update our card script so that instead of updating the field, we update the data grid. So where do we do it? On pre-open card. So we load in our anagram scores from our text file. Then here we put the file contents into the field. So the only change we need to make here, because it's already tab separated values, is we put URL file into field scores. But what we can do is we can either load it into a variable, or we can just set the DG text. So we'll be using the DG text because it's our tab separated values. So we set the DG text of group scores to URL file and T file name. And also the nice thing about a data grid is when you use them on mobile, they create their own mobile scrollers. So if you're using a data grid, you don't actually need to manually create a scroller, and you don't need to delete it when this card is closed, and you don't need to handle scroller did scroll. The data grid will, if it needs a scroll bar, and as long as you have, so here in our property inspector, we've got shows the scroll bars on, so we can probably turn it off. Oh no, sorry, I want that one on, and I want the horizontal scroll bar off. So as long as you've got that set to true, when the stack is deployed to a mobile device or a simulator, then the data grid will create its own mobile scroller. So you don't need to do all that work of mobile scroller create, mobile control set. It'll do all of that for you. So hopefully that should be all we need to do. Let's go back and then go to our scores again so that we can see them there. And we've got the built-in column resizing. We can sort by date, we can sort by score. So we've replaced our field with the data grid, but we hardly had to make any changes. All we had to do was set up the data grid, add the columns, and load in the data. And it was easy for us because we had stored it as tab separated values, but if it was stored in a different way, you would just have to do that sort of pre-processing of however your data was scored so that it shows up either tab separated values, so you can set the DG text, or sort of parse it into an array so you can set the DG data. And of course, what we can do here, since we've got our app, we've done a bit of theming, we can add some theming to our data grid here. So I think let's make our rows a little bit taller. Let's make them 25. Let's change some of the colors. So we'll have, I think, white and light grey looks quite nice so it's nice to sort of have that differentiation between the different rows. And then what we can do maybe is we can use our brown for our highlight color. So that matches our brown elsewhere. Or maybe we want to use this blue for our highlight color. That's quite a nice blue. Let's use the blue. Is that the same blue? I'm not sure it is, but nice bright blue. And then what we can do, since we've got that nice bright blue colors, we can also change the highlighted text color, maybe make that white. Does that stand out enough? So we've got the options to do a bit of theming even on a data grid table. Obviously more control with a form because you can lay it out exactly how you want, but here we've got our data grid table. So lots of places that you use a field, a multi-line field. You could maybe use a data grid and give yourself the options of having sorting and resizing, etc. All right, now the other place we could potentially use a data grid is here. So this is where we show the words that we've found. Is call a word? Yes, it is. So maybe what we can do here is, instead of just using a plain field, we could maybe use a data grid form. And what I thought might be nice is that when you click on the row, maybe it goes to a definition of the word that you found. So that might be a nice way to do it. So again, let's delete our found words field and we'll replace it with a data grid. I don't know why I'm having so much trouble having multiple data grids on one stack. That's something I'll need to report. What I'll do is I'll save that and then I'll just reopen LiveCode and hopefully it'll be fine. I should just be able to open the last stack again. Great. And then I will add my data grid. I'm going to call it found words because that's what the field was called. And we're going to make it a form instead of a table. And as before, the first thing we're going to do is we are going to set up our row template. Now, again, this is a group, so we want to go into edit group to allow us to add controls, etc. to the group. We'll change the name, I think, to word. I'll make this a bit smaller actually because our stack's not resizable. So let's see how wide our data grid is. Okay, so let's make that 300 because that's a nice round number and it's easier for me to remember when I go back to here. So let's make our template. So made sure that I've got select grouped on, so I've selected here and that means that it is the row template group. So I'm going to make the width of that 300 because this will just allow us to lay everything out in a way that we know it's going to fit. And then now I'm going to edit it. So I'm going to go into edit group. First thing I'm going to do is use this, set the background to 300, which will allow me to lay out sort of relative to that. There's my field. I could probably make that a bit wider. And again, I'm going to add a nice little SVG icon on here, which I'm going to call search icon. And let's change the icon here to search icon. Don't know if that's the best icon, but it'll do. It's close. It's a sensible enough icon, I think. Let's put that here, and let's change the color. Use brown this time. And I changed the name of that to Word. So now we've got a field called Word, and we've got our icon, and we know that everything's the right width. Although actually we need to leave, maybe need to leave some space for our scroll bar. So I'm just going to move that in a bit so that there's enough space for the scroll bar to show up without it going over that. And then we'll save that, and we can just close that to get it out of the way. Oh, so Mark has said try double clicking on the DG icon. Is that to allow us to create another data grid? Let's try it. So this icon. Ah, nice. That's good to know. I think it's still probably worth reporting the fact that I can't drag them. Oh, of course I can drag it out now. So I don't know why. I don't know what's happened those other times, but I'll have a look at it and see if I can work out what the problem is there. But that's a nice tip. I don't think I ever knew that you could just double click things in the toolbar and get controls. So it's always good for me to learn something as well. All right, so back to our data grid. So now we've set up our row template. So what we need to do is the same thing we did before. We will edit the script and we will fill in the data. So we will set the text of field Word of me data array Word. And I'm just going to comment out the layout control stuff. I'll leave the background because I want to set the rect to background graphic if we need to p control rect. We want the background graphic to fill the space. And then also I can just take this out because we're not using a label field. So that should be all we need there. Now what we need to do is we need to update our code anywhere we're using the field to use the data grid instead. So it's mostly in the card script, and let's look at new game first. So actually the first thing we're going to do is, because at the moment what we're doing is we're actually using our found words field to store our list of found words. We don't have a variable or anything to store it. So we're going to use a script local variable, s found words array. And this is what we will use to set up our data grid form. But we're also going to keep a list because it's a bit easier to look at the list when we're checking to see if a word has already been found or not. We could look through the array every time, but in this case, because we're never going to have that many, we'll just have an array which we'll use for the data grid, and we'll have a list which we'll use just for checking if a word's already been found or not. Okay, so in new game, what do we need to do here? So we still generate our letters and our words and our stars. We don't need to do the mobile scroller anymore, but we do need to, if you remember, when we do a new game, depending on how many stars we have, then we resize. We were resizing our field, we now need to resize our group. So after we've generated the stars, we're still doing it relative to the bottom of the stars. We work out the height of, but this time instead of it being field found words, it'll be group found words. And then we set the top of group found words. Score, that's fine. Clear other fields. Now we don't need to clear the field anymore because it doesn't exist, but what we need to do instead is we need to update our script local variables. So we've got our s found words array and our s found words list. So when we start a new game, we clear out those variables so we're ready to start again. And the next place we need to look is when we are checking an answer. So check answer, clear answer, check word, that's the one, check word. So we still get our word. We check if it's among the items of S word list. So that's still the same. That's just checking if it's valid. Then we check to see if the word has already been found. So now instead of checking if it is among the lines of field found words, then we will check if it is among the lines of our script local variable s found words list. If it is, you've already found the word. If not, you find a new word. So we update our found words. So again, instead of updating the field, we'll just put it after s found words list. Still fill our star, but again, we do it with the number of lines in found words list. Update the score stays the same. But the other thing we need to do is, as well as updating our found words list, which is what we use to check for words we've already found, we also need to update our found words array. So that our array, because we're going to set the DG data, needs to be a numeric array. So what we want to do is we need to create a new element with the next number of the word and put our word in. So what we'll do is we will work out what the next index, next element number will be. So we put the number of elements in S found words list plus 1 into the index. And then we will put T word, which is the word we found, into S found words list T index. That's the number of our element and goes into the word element. And then we set the DG data of group found words. All we've done here is we've updated our array and then we're resetting the DG data and we set it to, oh, that should be our S found words array there. So it's the number of elements in S found words array. And then we put it into S found words array and we set the DG data of group found words to S found words array. So when we find a word, we create a new element in our array and then we reset the DG data, which reminds me that I think in new game, we cleared out the variables, but we should also be doing set the DG data of group found words to S found words array because we want to clear it out when we start a new game. Okay, so we've done new game, we've checked our word. Is that all we need to do? I think it might be. Let's see if it works. Okay, so we make sure we're in run mode. Let's start a new game. Okay, so no errors and the data grid looks like it's the right size. Okay, let's find a word. Say, that's a word. So now here we have it in our data grid and we've got our word here and we've got our icon here. And we didn't do, as I said, we didn't do anything with laying out the controller or anything because we haven't set up our stack to be resizable. So we only need to handle those things if we know that the app is actually going to resize. And so now we want to respond when these are clicks on the row. So we can make it, firstly, what we'll do is we'll make it work just when they click on a line in the data grid, but we could also make it work just if they click on here, if we think that that's not working very well. So let's do it in our data grid script. So go into edit mode, select the data grid, open up the object inspector. Oh, no, sorry, open up the object script we want. Let me write some code. And we're going to handle mouse up. And just like we talked about previously, we're going to put the DG highlighted lines into a variable. The DG highlighted line of me into T line. And then we'll get the data associated with that line. So we put the DG data of line and then the line number of me, because we're in the data grid script, into T, let's just call it T data. And then what we're going to do is we're going to launch dictionary.com with the word that was selected. So what we want to do is we want to launch URL. Let me just make sure that I've got it right. I've got it in my slides here. So it's, can I just copy this? So it's https dictionary.com/browse and then the word from line, oh, there we go, we'll call that tdata. So that will launch URL dictionary.com/browse/ whatever value is in the word element of the array. Oh, that should be putting the DG highlighted line of me entity line. There we go. Now let's see if this works. So let's go into run mode. And now when I click on a row in the data grid, it should launch dictionary.com in the browser, tell us what say means. There we go. So that is what say means. To utter or pronounce, to express in words. Let's see if we can find another word here. It's not a very good. Will sax work? Will it tell me about saxophones? If we click on this, then informal for saxophone. So when we are clicking on the row in the data grid, we can get any of the bits of data from that row. In this case, we've just got the one, but earlier we saw when it was contacts, etc., then you've got all the elements in the array, and then you can do whatever you want to with them. Now, there's a couple of ways that we could get it to work so that it only happens if you click on the icon. So the first way is to do it in here, in our mouse up, and that's to check the target. So we can say if the short name of the target is, what do we call that? I'm going to have to look at the template again. Did I even give it a name? So make sure that I'm here. Search icon. That's a sensible name. So what I'm doing, I don't need to save that, is I'm going to say if the short name of the target is search icon, then do what we were doing before. Otherwise, don't. So now it will only work if I actually click on the search icon, hopefully. So if I click here, it should work, and it did. So I opened on my other monitor. But now if I click over here, then it doesn't. So you can choose to respond differently to when you click on different controls. You could also handle that in the row template script. So if I open up the edit script again, so you could add a mouse up here, and you could check the target here, and if it is the search icon, then you could, send a message or call a custom command to pop it up. And where you choose to put the sort of code to do with your data grid, it really depends on how it works best with your app. It might be that you want to put a mouse up in here where, depending on which control is clicked, and it just calls a different command, and all the commands are implemented on your stat script or in a library. Or you can do it this way, which is to handle it in the actual Datagrid script by getting the highlighted line of me and the data associated with that line and working from there. So a couple of ways you can do it, but they both work. Just depends. You probably don't want to put too many custom commands and things in the row template script. The row template, you probably want to try and keep that nice and clean. So I think if you put a mouse up in there, that's probably quite sensible, as long as you're then calling other custom commands that are implemented elsewhere. Or you can just handle it sort of on the sort of top level Datagrid script, where the script of this is the equivalent of having script on your button. It's actually just on the sort of the top level control. All right, so that is an introduction to Datagrid. We've done Datagrid tables, we've done Datagrid forms, and we've added them to our game in a couple of places. So for our score, we're just using a Datagrid table, letting us resize and sort. And for our, not sure what's wrong there. And for, oh, I bet I know what it is. Let's see. But it's because I have there's somewhere else where it refers to field find words, and I haven't changed it. Just search for field find words in the script. Okay, so we don't need scroller to scroll anymore, so I can comment that out. Because as I said before, then if you are using a data grid, then it will create its own scroller. Is there anywhere else that I'm referring to field finds words that haven't been updated? These are all right. So hopefully that's it. That's all the places that we're referring to that field. yeah, okay, so we've got a Datagrid table for our scores and a Datagrid form here, which will allow us to find the definition of some of our words. And we've got a little bit of time left. We've got about 7 minutes. So I had mentioned it before, but I'll bring it up here, is that the Lessons portal is a great place for Datagrid resources. It's not fully up to date. There's a few things that have been added to the Datagrid that are in the dictionary but don't have a lesson yet. But if you're getting started with Datagrids, it's a really good way of sort of seeing some examples, and it leads you through. So, you know, it starts here. What's a row template? What's a column template? How do I populate it? How do I customize it? How do I update data in a row? How do I clear it? It's really good. If you're sort of getting to grips with Datagrid, then I would highly recommend the lessons. Once you are a bit more familiar with Datagrids, or if you're already working with them quite a lot, then everything's in the dictionary as well. So if you are wanting to do things like set properties of a Datagrid in script, then they're all in the dictionary. So you can just search for DG and all the DG things will come up. And some things aren't Datagrid because DG is in widget. So those come up as well. But anything that starts with DG is a Datagrid property. And I think you can also use the associations to select the Datagrid probably here. Is Datagrid in this list? I think it probably is, but oh yeah, so here we've got Datagrid. There was a couple of other ones there. There's specific Datagrid column properties and things. So you can also filter by that. And the only other thing that I think is probably worth mentioning is when you are building standalones, then if you're using search for required inclusions, then that should be fine. It should pick it up. But if you're selecting inclusions manually, which I know people quite often end up doing, then if you have a Datagrid, do make sure that if you're manually selecting your inclusions, that you include the Datagrid library, which is here, because if you don't include the Datagrid library, then your Datagrids won't work. But like I say, that's only if you're manually selecting your inclusions. If you are doing it, if you're allowing the standalone builder to select them for you, then you don't need to worry too much about that. All right. Oh, thank you, Clarence. I'm glad you found it useful. Datagrids, they're great. Like once you get to grips with them, they give you so much control over the display of your data. It's so easy to get data out of them. Once you get to grips with them, then I think you'll find them really, really useful, a really nice addition to your LiveCode arsenal. And like I say, you can just start with the tables. You know, start with setting up the Datagrid tables and just making the most of the columns and stuff, and then move towards the forms when you're like, oh, the columns don't quite give me everything I need. I really want a checkbox in here. I mean, there's actually more you can do with the forms. You can have different types of data in there. So you can customize a table's columns. So let's look at this lesson, it's right here. So there are things that you can do. I'm not sure. Yeah, so this, you can customize columns. You do have a bit more control in the table than we went over because it was just an introduction. But do have a look at the lessons and also use the forums. There's lots of people on the forums, lots of users who are really, really, really familiar with Datagrid. So if you're trying to do something and you run into an issue and you're not sure how to do it, then do ask on the forums. Excuse me. Yeah, so this is a nice example. So this is a Datagrid table, but here you've got a drop down and you've got a star rating as well. So you do have a bit more control. We didn't go into that, but that is an option and there are lessons on that. And then Steve's asked, when searching for variables in LiveCode scripts, can regular expressions be used like DG at the start of a line? So if you mean within the script editor, I'm really genuinely not sure. Let's see, I don't think I ever have. So can we do DG star will that just find? That'll just actually find. Wait, let's check that I can find DG anything. I should. Oh, maybe if I do the card. Let's go back to our main card. I should definitely have DG things because I set the DG data. So will it find that? But as well as that sort of simple find down at the bottom of the script editor, there is the LiveCode find and replace here, which is a bit wider ranging. And here you can choose to use a regular expression. So I think you probably could here. So let's use a regular expression. Let's look for DG star in this stack, and we're looking in names and scripts. And it should find all the places. Yeah. So that has found all the places where we've used something DG. So if you want to use a regular expression to search, do use the find and replace from the edit menu, or Control F or Command F. I don't think the regular expressions will work just in the very simple sort of text search in the script editor. Oh, Peter says it does. Peter says the script editor does support regular expressions. Did I just get it wrong? Did I just not do a good example? Let's open up the card script again. So if I search for DG star, then nothing came up. More find DG. This is something I've genuinely never tried to use. So well, that's find and replace. I just want to find.
Peter said, look at more options.
Right, so I'm in. I think I did more options there, but let's do it again. Let's bring up the find. More options. Find what? DG star. Don't want to replace it with anything. We can current. Oh, find options here. Ah, there we go. Yeah, there we go. Regular expressions. Nice. Another thing I've learned today. I think sometimes at these sessions I learn more than anybody else. I've learned that I can double click things in the tools palette. I've learned that I can use regular expressions in the script editor. I mean, it's worth it for me. And then James has said, when do you have to use an SQL database instead of a Datagrid relational versus flat? So Datagrids are really for display. I wouldn't use a Datagrid as a sort of data source or as a storage method. They're really for display. So I'm not quite sure what your question there, what you're getting at with your question. If you have an SQL database, then a Datagrid is a really nice way of displaying the results of a query or something. Especially if you use a Datagrid form, you can you can set it up exactly how you want. But I would say that a Datagrid is very much sort of a display thing rather than a data storage thing. And like I say, I think I had a look at that lesson before, and there's a lesson on converting the results of an SQL query to a format for displaying in a Datagrid. But yeah, very much a way to show data rather than to store it. Okay, any last questions before we finish for today? Oh, great. I'm glad that helped, James. And then, yeah, so the slides and everything will go up, and there's a link in there to the lessons. And then the next session is on September the 30th, and we'll be adding levels to the game. So at the moment, you play the game and that's it. So, but it'd be nice to, find 5 words and then you move up a level, or so we'll be looking at just how to sort of expand our game a bit by adding levels and perhaps varying the difficulty in it. I'll turn off my screen sharing. Say hi to Chris again.
Hello. Thanks. That was a great session. Very, very good. Cool. Oh, well, thanks to everyone for joining. And thanks for those of you who joined during the coffee break as well. And you guys will be here tomorrow again for the advanced course, which will be hosted by Heather. And yeah, as Eleanor mentioned, we'll see you next time for the beginner's course in about a month.
Yeah.
So
I look forward to seeing you all then.
Yeah, and thanks for joining, guys.
All right. Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.